for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine. Antonio Amorim runs the biggest natural cork company in the world. He took over the reins in 2001 at a time of existential crisis for the industry because of TCA, cork taint, and the rise of alternative closures. But he's overseen important changes, not least the creation of a cutting-edge research and development department. He knows the cork industry as well as anyone and is very happy to share his knowledge of what he calls a noble material.
Hello, Antonio. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Tim. Thank you for the invitation and really looking forward to this conversation, which comes really handy because it just happens before my summer vacation.
Where are you off to? Somewhere nice, I hope.
Staying in Portugal is always a nice place to go on a vacation because we have so many people coming over to spend their summer break in Portugal that I think I will be joining them in the Algarve. And then we have a new spot just south of Lisbon called Comporta, which is supposed to be the New Hamptons of Europe. So all my kids want to go there, so I'll be joining them there for 2 or 3 days.
Sounds absolutely idyllic. Let's talk a lot about Portugal because you're very Portuguese. You were born, brought up in northern Portugal. You're very international, and we'll talk about that in a minute and where you've lived and studied. You're the fourth generation of your family to work in the cork industry. I read somewhere that you were already working at Amorim, part-time, of course, when you were 7 years old, because that would be a form of slavery if you were working age 7. What were you doing age 7?
It was voluntary working anyway, so you cannot call that slavery. But, you know, the company has grown over the last 30, 40 years quite a lot. So when I was 7, that's clearly before this huge growth period of the company. So this was a small, was already the biggest cork company in the world. But 2, 3 factories, I was born very close by. So basically you were born in the business. As my father always told my mother, you married me, but you also married my company. So this is the way that things work in family companies. So you grow up in the business, you follow the evolution of the company, you spend any free time that you have inside the company, you get to know the people that are working here, you get to attend meetings, important meetings, you get to know visiting clients from abroad, you get to know your suppliers, so you become really familiar with your business. So you become part of it, or the business becomes part of you.
Yeah, I mean, not age 7, I'm sure, but I mean, there was no chance you were ever going to do anything else, really. Were you almost groomed to take over? Because you took over from your uncle, didn't you?
Yes, when I started in 1989, I started to work at Amorim, and I was not allowed to come and work in the cork business for the first 6 years, which I was really disappointed with that. I thought that my uncle, which was our charismatic leader, he wanted basically to get rid of me. And I said, if you want to get rid of me, just tell me, I'll go and do something else. But no, he had different plans for me. So I worked in textiles. I worked in a textile distribution company that we created at the time. I worked in hotels. We were the Portuguese partners of Ibis and the Novotel chains that I helped developing. I worked also in a family casino for 2.5 years. And then I was made responsible for the construction of what was at the time the largest shopping center in Portugal. So completely different experience, nothing to do with cork. I was part of the board of the company since I started at Amorim since 1989. My father resigned when I came in, so I took his position, but I was not operationally involved. So only from 1996, I became involved operationally in the cork business.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the founder of your company. It's your great-grandfather, Antonio, like you, Alves de Amorim. And I remember looking at pictures of him when I came to see you guys. And, you know, he married quite late in life, a considerably younger wife. He had lots of kids, didn't he? I mean, he was really he was busy.
He had 9 children, but before he married, he worked for almost 30 years in the cork business. He was really the working partner of a partnership made with a relatively wealthy Porto family at the time. And he was the person that really had the entrepreneurial skill, but no money. So somebody else brought the money. He brought the skill that he try to develop and improve over the time. But this skill became, and is still today a little bit the same, on cork purchasing. So how do you evaluate the raw material? I mean, in natural corks, the raw material corresponds to 70% or 75% of the cost of the material. So if you do not know anything about cork, the evaluation of cork, how do I get the best corks from these planks? I mean, you are completely off the business. You can have the best consultants, the best improvement of productivity, the best Kaizen techniques. But if you're missing on the raw material side, you will never recover it on anything else. And that became his expertise. But look, this was a small workshop with 2 workers at the time servicing the local port wine industry.
Yeah. I mean, you once described yourself as an eternal student. Your first degree was in international trade, Birmingham University in England. Then you subsequently studied, I hope I've got them all in there, because you went to Bordeaux University, you went to Columbia University, you went to INSEAD, the famous business school, and you went to Stanford University. Have I got them all? I think I have. Which was the most rewarding of those, do you think, as an experience?
It's different moments in your life. I mean, going to England at 17, I took my driving license in London. Going to England at 17, that was quite an experience. I mean, you're living quite a comfortable neighborhood, always been in the same Catholic school in Portugal with a relatively close family environment, and suddenly you go and live somewhere else, experience completely different challenges, meeting completely different people. England very much multicultural, which is absolutely fantastic. So I think that's really a lifetime experience. 17
Party
years
time,
of age.
Right?
Sorry?
Party time.
Party time. Well, I discovered that a moment later. Party time as well. I think that the Bordeaux degree was after I finished Birmingham. I went straight into Bordeaux University. I was doing French classes, French language classes in the morning, and winemaking classes in the afternoon. And I remember very well because we were studying from the earth, the cepage, the cultivar or the varietal, and to the labels, to the bottles, and to the corks. And then when the professor started talking about the corks, he said, but corks, they grow in intervals of 7 years. And I raised my hand and I said, this part of the tuition, I think I'll have to do it myself, because it's not 7, it's 9 minimum. So I took over that class.
They got that bit wrong, did they?
Really, really enjoyed. So Bordeaux was, on that respect, very important. And then probably one of the most rewarding experiences, the management program at Columbia University. So upstate New York, I was the youngest ever guy at the age of 24. I think I celebrated 25 years there. I mean, everybody else was much older, CEOs of banks, of multinational companies. So that was probably the most... the better learning experience that I've had, is to be almost for 5 weeks with such experience. So I think I believe that I learned more from my colleagues than from the course itself. So great experience.
I mean, you said you started work at Amorim in 1989, but you took over as CEO president from your uncle, as you said, in 2001. And it was a time of considerable challenges for the cork industry, really, that plastic corks were increasingly popular. In that year, I think producers in the Clare Valley in Australia switched en masse to screw caps. Did it feel like a pivotal moment when you took over? Did you think, this is going to be a challenge?
No, I think it felt that way. I mean, in 99, 2000, 2001, people were doubting about the future of cork. Some of the cork people really have left the business because they didn't believe there was a future for cork anymore. And we as a family, we as a board of directors, we really met 2 or 3 times to say how we're going to face this challenge, because this is something that we had never faced before. And the unanimous decision is that we will stay with cork. But we'll stay with cork in a very different way. And this is really where I really think that a new attitude, a new approach, new people, this is really a turning point of our company, of our business, was really creating a future, but not in the same way that the previous 20 years have been passed. So huge challenges at that particular point of time. And I think that is why new people were brought in, and that's why I was called in also to run the company that I had already worked in for 4 or 5 years. So
yeah, I think let's come back to that later. I'd like to talk about the measures you've taken and where Cork is today. But I want to just begin with the raw material, really, because, I mean, I read somewhere that cork trees, which is a type of oak called Quercus suber, have been around possibly for 60 million years. Now, just tell us where they're grown in the world. Is it only the Western Mediterranean? Do you find cork oak trees anywhere else or not?
No, yes. I mean, we have about 2 million hectares of where cork is the dominant species, and those are basically in the Mediterranean basin, with Portugal and Spain accounting for, I would say, 55 or 56% of the cork area and 80% of the cork production. The rest of the cork is produced in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, a little bit in Sicily, in Sardinia, south of France, in Tuscany, in Maremma area. Also, you really have cork trees in more places than the ones that I am describing. I mean, you find cork trees in California. If you go ever to UC Davis's in Sacramento, you'll find cork trees on the campus of the university. You'll find cork trees in the southern hemisphere, in Chile, in Argentina, in South Africa. You have 100 hectares in Canberra, in Australia. Do you have enough cork trees to build an industry on anywhere else apart from the Mediterranean basin? No. And, it takes 25 to 30 years to get the cork harvest. I find it very hard that the Americans will wait that long to grow cork in their territory. So this is really where you have the climate, the soil, the characteristics of the tree have been adapting to this geographical region of the world, and that's why you have in the Mediterranean basin the concentration of the cork production.
So, and these trees like a hot, dry climate, basically, but not too hot.
I mean, they would do very well if in a climate that would not be so dry, in a more fertile ground. But normally, what happens is that you would plant something else instead of cork. I mean, if that land was really very rich, water rich, I mean, you would not plant a cork tree there, or you would not grow cork trees there. You basically would have fruit in which you can have an annual revenue, an annual crop, and not a crop every 9 years. So that's why cork basically grows in marginal areas from agricultural land, areas where you would not be growing much else.
A bit like vines in a way. Yeah, sometimes.
I think in vines you need a quantity of water that is probably 4 to 5 times higher than a cork tree.
Okay, interesting.
I mean, our cork tree really hibernates for 6 or 7 months in the year. There is no biological action happening in that tree. That's why it takes so long for this tree to reach its first harvest, and that's why it takes at least 9 years for us to get a harvest from the first one onwards.
And it's interesting, most of these trees are not planted by design. They're not deliberately planted. They're spread by acorns and pigs, right? So it's a form of massal selection in a way. I mean, you are planting some parcels by design, but mostly they're spread naturally, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that we have probably 5 to 8% of the existing trees that were man-planted. Most of the current trees that you have in this Mediterranean basin were clearly a result of spontaneous regeneration. So you have the winds, you have the birds, you have the pata negra hams that put their leg over an acorn that they could not eat, and that will create. You also have some pollination in some areas of Portugal and Spain. So most of it will grow spontaneously, and that's what makes this ecosystem so unique. However, we believe that today you do not have a rhythm of spontaneously grown trees capable of replying to the demand of cork happening in the future. So we think that we could complement the natural regeneration of the cork trees. Every year you have about 3% of trees that get into the production cycle that are harvested for the first time, but you also have 5 or 6% of the trees that are in their dying phase. So we're trying to correct that gap with man-planted forest. That this is really what Amorim is trying to bring onto the market. Once again, base everything on research and development. We have bought around 20,000 acres, 8,000 hectares of land where we will have cork trees planted, man-planted. We will try to irrigate until the first harvest some of these trees to accelerate from 25 years to 10 or 15, and then once you have the first harvest, we will remove any fertilization or irrigation in order for us to have the cork that we've always had, so that there is no difference between the existing quality of the cork and the future quality of this man-planted forest. And at the end of the day, will represent probably not 5%, will represent 7 or 8. So it will not change much, but we will be needing to correct the gap between the natural grown trees and the mortality rate. That's what we're trying to correct.
So normally a cork oak doesn't give you usable bark, basically, for cork stoppers until it's 25 years old, right? And when does it produce it? And then you harvest it every 9 years. But when does it produce its best corks? I mean, how old does it need to be before it gives you good?
First of all, when the tree is 25 years and is harvested for the first time, that cork is not usable for stoppers. It's usable for flooring, for insulation. 9 years later, you can use it for corks, but the yields that you get are still very low, which means that it takes really 40 years in order for you to have suitable cork planks to produce the best corks. And you will get the best corks from young trees. Young trees are trees that go up to between 40 and 90 years old. That's basically considered young or young to adult, as it is described by our scientists. That's the best period for a cork tree to produce its best cork.
And does there come a point when the cork tree is no longer serviceable? It's giving the yields are too low, or the cork's not of the same quality?
We estimate that it takes 15 to 18 harvests for a cork tree in its lifetime. I would say that after 130, 140 years, the thickness of the cork will be reduced. So you will get less cork stoppers, natural cork stoppers, which is the high end of all the cork stoppers produced in the world. You will be extracting less from these older trees. That's why the preferred growing period is between 40 and 90 years. You will still give corks, but in a less percentage than from 40 to 90.
I mean, I think I'm right in saying that 75% of the production of cork is used for wine stoppers of different types, but presumably also for spirits as well. But where else does the rest go? Anywhere that might surprise people to say, God, I didn't know that cork went there. The Tate Gallery, for example, it's in the Tate Modern, isn't it? It's in the floor, on the floor in the Tate Modern.
No, the Tate we have done. Cork was used in the temporary pavilion of the Serpentine Gallery that in 2012 was projected by the famous Pritzker Prize architects Herzog and de Meuron, the same that have designed Dominus winery in Napa Valley. Cork has been used for floors, for insulation, for shoes. Sandals are probably one of the oldest cork uses. Today, the modern fashionable version is Birkenstock.
You sell to them?
Which really
you sell to Birkenstock?
Birkenstock uses cork, and that's where you get the comfort in the Birkenstocks comes from the cellular structure of the cork. We can use cork and rubber together as a sealing material for electrical transformers, distribution transformers, small gasoline engine gaskets, gas meter gaskets. You can use cork for memo boards, for coasters, to put below a pan on a table, and more recently, and probably this is something that we're very, very proud, marine decking as a replacement of teak wood that has some limitation issues, and aerospace. Aerospace is really for us our probably ultimate technical use of cork. NASA has researched several materials. Cork was clearly the material that answered to the most of the features and the specifications that NASA requests, namely as a thermal shield. So we've been used by NASA for the last 30 or 40 years. We were used heavily on the space shuttle program, and now our typical clients would be SpaceX, Blue Origin, so on the satellite launch programs, but more recently also on defense, drone usage and some other critical, more secretive uses of cork in defense systems.
Yeah, I mean, you like to describe cork as a noble material, and I know that sustainability is part of that. Obviously, it's a natural material, but also it absorbs carbon dioxide, doesn't it? So it's a kind of barrier against desertification, against climate change. Can you tell us a bit more about that nobility?
Well, I think that there are probably 2 or 3 elements to cork nobility. First of all, its performance, its cellular structure. Every cubic centimeter, you have 40 million cells on a honeycomb structure. 70% of the cellular structure of cork is air. That's why it's such a light, compressible material with elastic memory, durable, resilient, and all those characteristics. So the cellular structure of cork makes it absolutely unique. That's one point. Second point, the fact that we don't cut the cork tree, we just peel the cork every 9 years out, also gives something unique. You don't stop the CO2 capture anytime. So it takes 180 to 200 years before that cycle is actually interrupted. Until then, day and night, that cork tree is capturing CO2. For every kilo of cork produced, it has captured 73 kilos of CO2. So all cork products have a negative carbon footprint. But because it's such a durable tree, it means that on parts of the world where it is based, Mediterranean Basin, Iberian Peninsula, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, it works as a barrier against desertification. It takes a long time for the root structure of the cork to solidify, to be consolidated, and that means that the tree is highly resistant against winds, storms, and all those characteristics, which makes it a perfect tree to really stop the advance of the desertification. In Tunisia, basically the desert stops when the cork forest starts. And that's a true example how resilient this cork species is.
I want to talk to you a bit about the wine closures market in general, because it's not just cork, obviously, and what the relative sectors have. I mean, can you just tell us, what does plastic have? You know, what does the DM style corks? What does screw cap have, and what does cork have? What does natural cork have?
Very well. So, the market has evolved over time, as you know. I mean, emerging markets like the US, Australia, South Africa, Chile have really, over the last 25 years, or 30 years, captured a lot of the attention on the wine market. So the market has evolved. In 2022, I think the market has peaked in the terms that you have about 20 billion wine and sparkling wine bottles requiring a closure in 2022. On top of this, you probably have 25% of wine that has been sold under bag-in-a-box and Tetra Pak. So if you basically make those accounts, that corresponds to the amount of wine consumed related by the OIV in the world. Typically, you have about 2022 figures, 3 billion bottles, sparkling wine bottles, where cork has clearly the vast majority of that, probably 90% market share on sparkling wines, which means that you had 17 billion wine bottles. And on those, you probably have around 1 billion with plastic stoppers, clearly on the way out. They peaked in 2007, but they've been, when they did 4 billion closures, They are doing 1 billion. I think that's a question of time until plastic goes out of the market. And then you have about 5.5, 6 billion bottles that were using screw caps. And the remaining, so from 17 billion, you have probably another 11 billion that require that a cork. And from cork, you probably had in those figures, you probably had 10 or 11 billion. You probably had 20%, 15 to 20% natural cork, and the rest is composite cork. And composite cork, you have all the stoppers used for faster rotating wines that have really been gaining market share over natural cork and over plastic over the years.
And where would you include DM? DM would be in that grouping, would it?
DM would be 2 billion.
Yeah.
Out of these 10 billion, DM would be 2 billion, and we should be doing something like 3.5 to 3.5 billion micro granulate corks ourselves.
And who's your biggest competitor? Is it screw caps, presumably, especially in certain markets? There's some markets where it's difficult for you, isn't it?
Screw caps is today the biggest.
Yeah.
Yes, screw caps is today the biggest challenger for cork. Of course, that the 2024 figures are not the same. I think that the world market has lost around 3 billion bottles in 2 years. And that's not in sparkling, and that's not in white wine. That's basically concentrated this loss, some in rosé and mostly in red wine. So all these figures need to be adjusted down in cork, in screw cap, and in plastics over the last 2 years. But our biggest competitor remains screw cap. In screw cap, you have huge companies that are operating in wine closures and also in spirit.
And the biggest markets for screw caps are what? New Zealand, Australia, South Africa to a degree, Austria?
Biggest market in volume for screw caps probably today should be Australia, I would say. New Zealand, a very big percentage of screw cap, but it's not a huge huge country producing wine. You basically have Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Chile, and South Africa as the countries that are using the biggest percentage of screw cap over cork. On the remaining countries which represent the majority of wine production in the world, France, Italy, Spain, and the US, cork is the dominant closure.
Okay, interesting. Listen, I want to take you back to that period at the end of the 90s, just before you took over. And you said to me that the roof fell in on our heads. What happened? Who made the first link between TCA and Cork Taint? Did that happen around that time, or was it earlier than that?
No, I think it's earlier than that. It started with a Swiss scientist in 1983 that mentioned TCA for the first time. There was a publication done at the time. I don't think that the industry in 1980s were ready to recognize anything that could be part of our responsibility. So I don't think that all the efforts was somehow to cover up this release of information and not to face it very, very openly. So that was the first time that TCA was mentioned as the result of the metabolization of free chlorine and mold. At the time, that was the only thing that we changed at the time, late 80s. We used to wash our corks with chlorine, believe it or not. And we went to hydrogen peroxide as a consequence of this research done by these Swiss scientists. So that's something happened to minimize the issue, but I don't think we had really a determined action plan to go
do something about it.
around it, or to go facing it and solving it, as we have started from 2001 onwards.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about it as an existential threat, really, to the natural cork industry. And you said what was causing it was partly, it was this chlorine washing. Does it also come from the trees themselves? I heard sometimes that it was, the lower part of the bark might give you more TCA. Is that true?
Exactly. Exactly. You are absolutely correct. It could come on the part of the tree that is of the cork that is in contact with the earth, and that's what you get your moldy taste from. Those, we never made stoppers out of that. The only problem is that could contaminate the healthy cork in the boilers when we were boiling the cork. So we started from the 90s onwards to cut those parts before we did the boiling of the cork, to make sure that they would not be contaminating all the other planks. And today this is absolutely done by everybody in the industry. We really started to improve things, improving the practices that every single cork company was developing. We established with some researchers and scientists and experts a code of good manufacturing practices that was applicable to large companies and to the small companies. If the small company was supplying the big one would not get its certificate if the small one, its supplier, was not also certified. So there was a movement towards the right direction from the 90s onwards.
I want to talk to you about research and development in a second, but first of all, let's just talk about random oxidation, because it's another thing the cork industry got blamed for, not just TCA, but premature oxidation of white wines in particular, particularly in Burgundy. Was that unfair, do you think, to blame it on corks? Was it anything to do with corks?
I think I was a little bit too fast to get an easy target to blame. I think today and in Dijon were presented some research studies made by some people in Burgundy doing that research that have completely exempt cork for responsibilities on premature oxidation, which was really being a pain on some Burgundy white wines. It happened. Everybody, consumer, faced it. The responsibility on the cork, I think, has been waived over this research. It took some consequences, people changing from natural stoppers to microgranulate stoppers, because they thought they would getting a more reductive stopper on a microgranulate cork than on a natural cork that has inside a little bit more oxygen that when you bottle goes into the inside of the bottle. So those are things that have been improved with time, and today cork is not taking any blame for that. Then there was the variation, bottle variation, which is also something that we've been very, very, very close to, working very hard. We have developed systems like the bee wax, that gives absolutely perfect homogeneity and even more freshness to the wine, something that has been used for years by some of the top Burgundian producers that today we are also using for the majority of our iconic natural cork stoppers for the high-end wines. So I think that technically today we really, on top of the products that we are producing, meaning TCA, bottle variation, and the oxidation issues that were not blamed on cork anymore from 3 or 4 years ago. So that's a path that we have been going through. But everything that we do is science-based, and those are the things that we feel most proud of, is that we really can not only prove our arguments, but we can also replicate everything that we do because it's science-based.
Yeah, I mean, you started this research and development program, really, department, I think in 2000 or 2001. I mean, what have you changed over the last 25 years? I mean, when I went to the factory with you, it was fascinating. It looks like pretty much everything. I mean, you've got, robots sniffing corks these days. I mean, the protocols I was surprised by and impressed by. What has been the most important change, would you say? That it's science-based?
I think that the most important change has been cultural. Is to understand that if you don't change, you don't have a future. So this is not an act of intelligence; it's an act of survival, and that's really what we have changed. We have changed the culture of this industry to really improve the performance. Performance starts to be improved, as I said a moment ago, by improving the practices, by improving the technology. We got to know that TCA is volatile with steam. So if we really improve the technological parts of your production process, you're going to be getting rid of TCA throughout the production processes. And at the end, we have quality control mechanisms like NDTech, one by one detection of all the natural stoppers that really give us that guarantee that we absolutely require to be the preferred premium wine closure in the world. So, but the most important thing is to change the culture. We're not living on the past. If we don't change, we don't have a future. And this is really what we have made happen in the last 25 years in this company.
I mean, just tell me where we are today, because I talked to Paulo Lopes, who's your R&D manager, a fascinating guy, and he said that for a scientist, 0% doesn't exist. So you can't guarantee that corks are TCA free. What's the estimated rate of TCA these days, and what was it when you took over in 2001? And also, do you get what you pay for? And if you pay for more expensive corks, do you get a lower rate of risk, as it were?
First of all, it's very difficult to answer objectively that question of the claim ratio, because the claim ratios on cork were always very, very low, because probably most claims never got reported anyway. So how many consumers really report throughout the supply chain their unpleasant moment of that cork, of that bottle that really was TCA contaminated? Very few of them. So the important thing is probably not from the final client. The important thing is the feedback that we get from the technical services of the wineries, which are the gatekeepers of the final consumers anyway. And we have seen those numbers being very, 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 very much reduced today with the technology we have, with the practices that we have, with the care that we give to our material. The 99.99 is possible, but we do billions of corks every year. So, and that's what Paulo was trying to refer to you, that zero doesn't exist for a scientist. So there is always further room for improvement. But today, and Tim, I'm sure that you've been able to witness with the numerous tastings that you have done, that today, I don't think you have anymore an issue with the TCA.
And what about that thing, if you pay more, do you get a better cork?
On natural corks, you really, if you pay more, it means that you have a visual quality of cork that is more dense. If you have a more dense cork, you have less lenticels, less possibility of TCA existing. But today we have to guarantee free TCA on every single cork, below threshold on every single cork, being a 6 or 7 cent cork, as well as a 5 or 6 euro cork. So we have to guarantee that across the board. The fact that you pay more applies to different features on the cork, such as the longevity, the amount of oxygen that is transmitted onto the wine, the length of the time that the wine will stay in contact with that cork. That has to do more with that than with TCA. TCA today, we are able to give very performing corks from 6-7 cents to 6 or 7 euros per unit.
I mean, you're a wine collector and a wine lover and a wine drinker. How do you feel if you get a cork bottle? Do you get really angry if you see a cork bottle in a restaurant, or something you've had in your cellar for years and you get a cork bottle, you think, oh, dang, because you can't send it back, can you? Or you can send it back. You can't send it back to the producer, could you? Or could you?
Well, I will never do that, as you may imagine, but I get very frustrated that I get one of those bottles. I open thousands of bottles at home, and I don't recall the last time that we have had one, but it happens once or two with older vintages. Sometimes today is not actually that moldy earthy flavor. Sometimes it's some off flavor that you don't relate it immediately with TCA, but you have a very, very small number of TCA in that cork. But today, really, it's not, I believe, anymore an issue. And from 2000 and I don't know, to the late 2000s, I don't think this is becoming an issue anymore. Older vintage, probably a little bit higher incidence. I would never send a bottle back. I would take the cork. I would analyze it in our gas chromatography to make sure that had something above 0.3 or 0.5, which is the detection level of the cork, and I will use that being our cork or somebody else's cork as a way to tell people and call people's attention to the fact that we need to keep vigilant, we need to keep ourselves on our toes. There are things that we have to do to continue improving that cork, and that's what we've been doing, and that's what, fortunately for us as well, the whole industry has been doing. So it's not one company doing better, it's the whole industry performing better. And that's what, in my point of view, saved the cork industry.
I want to ask you something, because you've got this amazing business background. You know, you've worked in different industries, not just the wine industry. You're the fourth generation running a family business. How hard is it to keep these family businesses in family hands? I mean, I think you've said that if somebody's not competent, it doesn't matter whether they're in the family or not, they shouldn't be running the business, right? Well, why do some family businesses succeed and others fail? Is it just people?
I mean, I think that you need to have some basic principles in your head. First, it's absolutely forbidden from anybody to live from the company. You need to work for the company, not to live from the company. That is a principle I try to teach my children. You work for the company, not the company working for you. So that's for me my first criteria. And that brings immediately the world competence. And today we have by far the best generation of managers that Amorim has ever had in its history. And that's what makes the company successful, alive, and kicking. So today, you do not need to be an Amorim to run this business. You need to be a professional, competent person that has the necessary dedication and focus to take the business forward. And that's why we have great managers helping us out, taking the business forward. New generations are getting to an age that they could come and work in the family company. We absolutely ask for them to have an external experience before coming in, after they finish their studies in normally great universities. And that might come sooner or later. But those are the rules. The rules are meritocracy. Of course, they have a name that will not put any more weight on their shoulders than it should do, but that will not take any weight off their shoulders as we go along. So this is, we employ 4,500 people. We're very, very responsible for a lot of decisions, for the livelihoods of thousands of people, thousands of suppliers. We have a huge supply chain with thousands of growers that sell cork to us every year. So huge responsibility. But look, do not be somebody else. Be yourself. Make sure that being yourself is good enough to keep the company up and running. And passion is part of an attribute from somebody
and the love of wine, I think, in your case. The final question is how do you get away from wine? How do you get away from your day job? How do you get away from the cork industry? I know your family is very important to you. You like to hunt? Are you still hunting? And anything else? Are you still a student at heart? Anywhere you'd like to go off and study again? Another university you've not been to?
I do. I have been on the board of several universities over the last few years. So not taking the role of as a student, but taking the role as somebody that hires and recruits a lot of students. And I think that sharing with younger people the experience and namely to new generations that sometimes they want to have all the merits, all the salaries, but no responsibility, telling them that the attitude, the way their initiative is absolutely key for them to be successful in a company. They all like to have multiple experiences at the beginning of their career, but at the end, halfway through, they really need to make a selection, to make a choice of making their professional path. And I always tell them the following: look, the most important thing is for you to be happy. And if you're not happy at what you
do something
change.
else. I think that's
do
fantastic.
Something else. But if you're happy with what you do, focus. Make sure that this becomes part of you, and you're going to be highly successful, because all these young kids with so much training, great universities, great for training, I mean, they are absolutely fantastic. And today we require more and more of these youngsters at our companies, sometimes in our board of directors, because we are facing youngsters in the market in a completely different way from previous generations. So we need the advice of youngsters coming in to make sure that we are driving the industry in the right possible way.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very good moment on which to end. It's been fascinating to talk to you. Thank you for sharing your insights and your passion for the cork industry. It's been great chatting to you, and I'll see you very soon.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for this opportunity, and have a great vacation as well.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, I hope you found that as interesting as I did. A deep dive into the world of wine closures. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is the pianist and master of wine, Susan Lynn. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter, @timatkin, and on Instagram, @timatkinmw. See you next week.